Hello everyone, welcome back to the video on my Storytime channel. So before I continue reading this next chapter of Left Behind, I must make one thing clear that I've said before many times in my videos, and I'll say it again. I'm not a Christian, I'm a preterist. I believe that Jesus already returned in 66 AD, and destroyed the temple in 70 AD, and delivered the kingdom back up to God. So clearly Christianity ended in 70 AD, and Jesus already returned, and his work is finished and over. That's what I believe personally as a preterist, but that's my belief. Anyways, let's continue. On page 240 of chapter 13 of Left Behind. I don't know, maybe I'll tell him it's really you. Then while you're with him, I'll release the report that your obit was wrong, that right now you're doing a cover story interview with Carpathia. A cover story? You've come a long way from calling him a low-level bureaucrat from a non-strategic country. I was at the press conference, Buck. I met him, and I can at least gauge the competition. If we don't feature him prominently, we'll be the only national magazine that doesn't. Like I say, if he's like If he's like the typical politician, you can put that out of your mind, Buck. You're going to find this guy the farthest thing you've ever seen from the typical politician. You're going to thank me for getting you the exclusive interview with him. I thought that was his idea because of my colossal name, Buck said, smiling. So, I could have turned him down. Yeah, and being the executive editor of the only national magazine that fails to cover the most exciting new face to visit the States. Believe me, Buck, Steve said during the ride to the UN building, this is going to be a refreshing change from the doom and gloom we've been writing and reading for days. The two used their press credentials to get in, but Buck hung back out of sight of his colleagues and the competition until all were seated in the General Assembly. Steve held a seat for him in the back, where he would not draw attention to where he'd slipped in at the last minute. Meanwhile, Steve would use his cellular phone to call him the story of Buck's reappearance, so it would hit the news by the end of the day. Carpathia entered the assembly in a dignified yet inauspicious manner, though he had an entourage of a half dozen, including Chaim Rosenzweig and a financial wizard from the French government. Carpathia appeared for an inch or two over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, thick-chested, trim, athletic, tan, and blonde. His thick shock of hair was trimmed neatly around the ears, sideburns, and neck, and his navy-on-navy pinstripe suit and matching tie were exquisitely conservative. Even from a distance, the man seemed to carry himself with a sense of humility and purpose. His presence dominated the room, yet he did not seem preoccupied or impressed with himself. His jewelry was understated. His jaw and nose were Roman and strong. His piercing blue eyes set deep under thick brows. Buck was struck that Carpathia carried no notebook, and he assumed that the man must have his speech notes in his breast pocket. Either that, or they were being carried by an aide. Buck was wrong on both counts. Secretary General Mngwanti Numo of Botswana announced that the assembly was privileged to hear briefly from the new president of the nation of Romania, and that the formal introduction of their guest will be made by the Honorable Dr. Chaim Rosenzweig, with whom they were all familiar. Rosenzweig hurried to the podium with a vigor that belied his age, and initially received a more enthusiastic response than did Carpathia. The popular Israelite statesman and scholar had said that it would give him great pleasure to introduce to this worthy and august body a young man that I respect and admire as much as anyone I've ever met. Please welcome His Honor, President Nicolae Carpathia of Romania. Carpathia rose, turned to the assembly, and nodded humbly, then shook hands warmly with Rosenzweig. With courtly manners, he remained at the side of the lectern until the older man was seated, and stood relaxed and smiling before speaking extemporaneously. Not only did he not use notes, but he also never hesitated, misspoke, or took his eyes off his audience. He spoke earnestly, with passion, with a frequent smile, and with occasional appropriate humor. He mentioned respectfully that he was aware it had not been a full week yet since the disappearance of millions all over the world, including many who would have been in this very room. Carpathia spoke primarily in perfect English with only a hint of a Romanian accent. He used no contradictions and enunciated every syllable of every word. Once again, he employed all 9 languages with which he was fluent, each time translating himself into English. In one of the most touching scenes Buck had ever witnessed, Carpathia began by announcing that he was humbled and moved to visit for the first time this historic site, where nation after nation has set its sights. One by one, they have come from all over the globe on pilgrimages as sacred as any to the Holy Lands, exposing their faces to the heat of the rising sun. Here they have taken their stand for peace in a once-for-all, rock-solid commitment to putting behind them the insanity of war and bloodshed. These nations, great and small, have had their fill of death and maiming of their most promising citizens in the prime of their youth. Our forebears were thinking globally long before I was born, Carpathia said. In 1944, the year the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were established, this great host nation, the United States of America, along with the British Commonwealth and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, met at the famous Dumbarton Oaks Conference to propose the birth of this body. Displaying his graph of history and his photographing memories of dates and places, Carpathia intoned, from its official birth on October 24th, 1945, and the first meeting of the General Assembly in London, January 10, 1946, to this day, tribes and nations have come together to pledge their wholehearted commitment to peace, brotherhood, and the global community. He began in almost a whisper. From lands distant and near they have come. From Afghanistan, Albania, Algeria, he continued, his voice rising and falling dramatically with the careful pronunciation of the name of each member country of the United Nations. Buck sensed a passion, a love for these countries and the ideals of the UN. Carpathia was clearly moved as he plunged on, listing country after country, not droning but neither in any hurry. Amended to his list, representatives noticed that with each name, someone from that country rose in dignity and stood erect, as if voting anew for peace among nations. Carpathia smiled and nodded at each as they rose, and nearly every country was represented. Because of the cosmic trauma the world had endured, they had come looking for answers, for help, for support. Now they had been given the opportunity to take their stand once again. Buck was tired and felt grimy, wearing 2-day-old clothes, but his worries were a distant memory as Carpathia moved along. By the time he got into the S's in his alphabetical listing, those standing had begun to quietly applaud each new country mentioned. It was a dignified, powerful thing, the show of respect and admiration, this re-welcome into the global village. The applause was not so loud that it kept anyone from hearing Carpathia, but was so heartfelt and moving that Buck couldn't suppress the lump in his throat. Then he noticed something peculiar. The press representatives from the various countries were standing with their ambassadors and delegations. Even the objectivity of the world press had temporarily vanished to what they might previously have written off as jingoism, superpatriotism, or sanctimony. Buck found himself eager to stand as well, ruing the fact that his country was near the end of the alphabet, but feeling more pride and anticipation welling up within him. As more and more countries were named and their people stood proudly, the applause grew louder, merely because of the increased numbers. Carpathia was up to the task, his voice growing more emotional and powerful with each new country name. On and on he thundered as people stood and clapped. Somalia, South Africa, Spain, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Suriname, Swaziland, Sweden, Syria. More than 5 minutes into the recitation, Carpathia had not missed a beat. He had never once hesitated, stammered, or mispronounced a syllable. Buck was on the edge of his seat as the speaker swept through the T's and reached Uganda, Ukraine, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, the United States of America. And Buck leapt to his feet, Steve right with him, along with dozens of other members of the press. Something had happened in the disappearances of loved ones all over the globe. Journalism might never be the same. Oh, there would be skeptics and those who worshipped objectivity. What happened to brotherly love? What had become of depending on one another? What happened to the brotherhood of men and nations? It was back. And while no one expected that the press might become the public relations agency for a new political star, Carpathia certainly had them in his corner this afternoon. By the end of his litany of nearly 200 nations, young Nikolai was in emotional revered pitch. With such electricity and power in the simple naming of all the countries who had prolonged to be united with each other, Carpathia had brought the entire crowd to his feet in full voice and applause. Press and representative alike. Even the cynical Steve Plank and Buck Williams continued to clap and cheer, never once appearing embarrassed at the loss of their detached objectivity. And there was more. As the Nikolai Carpathia juggernaut sailed on. Over the next half hour, he displayed such an intimate knowledge of the United Nations that it was as if he had invented and developed the organization himself. For someone who had never before set foot on American soil, let alone visited the United Nations, he displayed amazing understanding of its inner workings. During his speech, he casually worked in the name of every Secretary General from Tegri Lai of Norway to Ngomo and mentioned their terms of office, not just by year, but also by specific day and date of their installation and conclusion. He displayed awareness and understanding of each of the 6 principal organs of the UN, their functions, their current members, and their particular challenges. They swept through the entire 18 UN agencies, mentioning every one, its current director, and its headquarters city. This was an amazing display, and suddenly it was no wonder this man has risen so quickly in his own nation. No wonder the previous leader had stepped aside. No wonder New York had already embraced him. After this, Buck knew Nikolai Carpathia would be embraced by all of America, and then the world. So yeah, that's chapter 13 of Left Behind. pages 240 to 247. And like I said before, I'm not a Christian, I'm a preterist. I will never be a Christian, I never want to be a Christian. I'm just a fan of the Left Behind series and a fan of the Left Behind franchise. That's all I am. A fan of the Left Behind series and Left Behind the Kids series. Nothing more, nothing less. Well, yeah, that's chapter 13 of chapter 13 of Left Behind, pages 240 to 247. Take care, everybody. Another video from my Storytime channel.